and there's intimacy on the radio, and there's naturalness on the radio that can never be replicated on TV. The marvelous resurgence of radio as a political force in this country.
News-related radio programming is evolving.
There's a huge hole in our dialogue that can be filled by the synthesis of traditional radio and the freedom that comes from a live podcast. You're about to experience Cowboy State Politics Live. Here we go. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another fantastic installment of Cowboy State Politics Live. From very high above all the puerile and insipid forms of Wyoming mainstream media, this is Cowboy Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone, broadcasting to you from the depths of the Middle Swamp in Wyoming's capital of Cheyenne. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Tuesday. You are listening to Cowboy State Politics Live, the bastion of conservatism in a veritable Wyoming prairie of illogic, liberalism, and just flawed thinking, my friends. And none of that, I mean, there could be no perfect, better, I see, and I'm having trouble talking. Liberalism just gets me all tied up, and and that's the essential purpose behind it, to confuse you, to lead you to believe things that aren't true. But this program really is the only conservative outlet in the entire state of Wyoming. And, you know, there are others like the Cowboy. They like to pretend that the redcoats in the Wyoming legislature, well, they are conservatives. And they'll go to great lengths to publicize them, to publish their op-eds, and they never really correct anything that is in error. None of the newspapers in the state of Wyoming are in any way conservative. I was talking to our pal, Representative Ken Pendergraft, yesterday, and he told me that the record for the Sheridan Press and Sheridan Media is still intact. You see, last session, they didn't contact him a single time. Now, Ken Pendergraft is the second in command of the House Appropriations Committee. You would think that newspapers or news outlets would want to talk to him. But as yet, zero. That is the amount of times that the Sheridan Media has contacted Representative Ken Pendergraft about anything. However, if you look at their pages and all of the interviews that they've done, yeah, they've talked to Marilyn Connolly a lot. They've talked to Bo Beitman, and we're going to get to him in just a second. But they've talked to everybody else, but not Representative Pendergraft. And it makes you wonder why that is. Well, the reason is Wyoming, the people in the Wyoming media, they don't want to give you any indication that the folks that are in power, some of them anyway, aren't conservative in the least. They don't want to hear that. Look at the pages of the Cowboy right now. On their guest column page, there's an op-ed from Senate President Bo Beitman. Now, first, I got to tell you, my friends, that it is supposed to be fun when you're right. You're supposed to, have a feeling of jubilation that, yeah, you pegged something correctly. And especially in the news business and in my business, which isn't necessarily news, a lot of it's commentary. It's supposed to be kind of a celebration, right? It's fun to be right. But in this case, it's not fun. I told you before this entire session started that Bo Beitman had made a deal with the Redcoats in the Senate. That's absolutely true. He allowed, and I don't know if Bo Beitman put together the committees, but they're clearly not conservative. 7 out of the 10 committees have very liberal chairmen. In fact, there's a gatekeeper at every single committee. So clearly, and here's the big fat lie. Biden surrogates in the Wyoming legislature, they tried to tell everybody, oh, no, we've stacked the committees with conservative people. There's no chance of nothing bad getting through. There's no chance of conservative legislation getting gutted. None of that was true. If you look at all the committees, I mean, there are several of them that are just jam-packed with liberals. Wendy Schuler is the head of the Education Committee. Nancy Case, is the head of the Corporations Committee. Eric Barlow, who has a very interesting record when it comes to pro-life legislation. I've talked about that before on the program. Just to give you a heads up, when he's not in charge, he's got a pretty good voting record. When he's the chairman or when he was Speaker of the House, very bad record. So anyway, all the committees manned by liberals. And if you look at what the Wyoming Senate has done, they pretty much gutted all of the election integrity agenda that was put forth this session. I think that they killed like 11 bills that were put forth out of the Wyoming House. They tried to jam through, Bo Beitman himself tried to jam through an omnibus election integrity thing that really was just copy and pasted from House legislation. You can go back and compare the two, and you'll find identical language. But anyway, I guess the main question is, why would someone want to keep telling you that they're conservative? Well, usually that's because they're not, because they're trying to convince you of something that they are absolutely not. And it's really kind of sad because we had a great opportunity this session to turn this state around, to stop the wasteful spending. And this is a great contradiction when we get to Beitman's op-ed, but to stop the outrageous spending coming out of the Wyoming state government, to get a handle on property taxes, which to some degree they did. They only offered relief, and they killed the only real property tax reform bill that was even suggested in this legislative session. So there's a lot of things that, and illegal immigration. Who could forget about that? The Senate pretty much killed every meaningful illegal immigration measure that was put forward. The best one was Senate File 124. That was Sherry Steinmetz' bill to make it a crime if you harbor illegal aliens. They killed that one straight out, right on the Senate floor. Didn't even really give it a chance. Their climate change. Here's another good one. They killed the bill that would have made in Wyoming statute that would have declared CO2 as not a pollutant. Interestingly enough, that's exactly what the Trump administration is doing. So all around, pick any conservative issue, and we can pretty much find multiple examples in the Wyoming Senate of how they have not acted conservatively at all. But let's go to Beitman's op-ed. It's entitled, Wyoming Senate Delivered Historic Conservative Wins, published in the Cowboy. Of course it is. And I quote, as a body, the Wyoming Senate worked cooperatively to pass a 50% property tax cut without including new entitlement spending to the tune of over $200 million to local governments. Now, this one's confusing because there's two forms of spending in Wyoming. There's spending at the local level, which comes from the form of property taxes. That's all local money. Not a dime of property tax revenue goes to the state of Wyoming. And then there is state spending, where most of their revenue comes from sales tax and mineral royalty taxes. And that is an entirely different critter. You see, in the past, I don't know, 2-3 legislative sessions, the liberals who were in control of the Wyoming legislature put over $1.4 billion in savings. Now, you might say, well, that's great, right? We have to have a rainy day account. We need to have money set aside for the bad times. And I would agree, but how much is enough? Wyoming has over $30 billion in the savings account. Well, the truth is, though the spending is different and separate, and there are different kinds of spending and different kinds of taxation, really, it's all your money. The state does not have its own money, whether it comes from property taxes or sales taxes or ad valorem taxes or mineral royalties. It is all your money. And by the way, if the state has a surplus, which right now we do, we have a sovereign wealth fund that is probably one of the biggest in the entire country, why does the Wyoming government need to continue to keep it and sock it away? And you could say, well, it's for a rainy day. Yeah, but how much is enough would be my question. And so the bill that was put forth out of the House, and I think that you could hear a better explanation of this on the podcast when I interviewed Representative Tony Locke, Chairman of the Appropriations Committee, John Baer, and Chairman Chris Knapp, talk about the House's version of this property tax reform bill, which, by the way, the House passed House Bill 169, which was a 50% tax cut in property taxes, and then it had a 25% tax bill. So back to what Beitman wrote. Without including a new entitlement of over $200 million to local governments. Okay, so an entitlement the best way to describe that is money that is being given to somebody that they don't deserve or that they didn't earn. Well, the truth is, all of this tax money that comes into the state of Wyoming belongs to the people. It doesn't belong to state government. So to just say, we've got all this cash, we're not going to give anything back to local governments, it's a little bit ridiculous. Now, here's the other part of this that I think is really important. Any discussion of tax reductions without reducing spending, you've heard me say this on the program over and over, but any discussion of tax cuts without reducing spending is kind of a meaningless conversation. All right, so Beitman's trying to paint the House version as creating a new entitlement. Not exactly. You see, the state has to curb its spending just like local governments do. Now, I just finished telling you how property taxes fund local governments. Not a dime of that goes to the state government. Well, with the tax cut bill, with Senate File 69 on the governor's desk, local governments are going to have to reduce spending. But the thing is, it's not going to be really to meaningful level. So, for example, most of the counties are only going to have to cut spending to single-digit percentages. It's actually kind of ridiculous. There's one county, Niobrara, they're on the list of what we call hardship counties, where they don't bring in enough tax revenue to really fund all of their, the functions of government. I think they're going to take like a $70,000 hit, which is, to you and me, 70 grand is a lot of money, but to a county, yeah, that's not really a lot of money at all. That's not even going to buy you 2 pickups. So the hit to local governments, not really that big at all. So when you look at the proposal, and I might argue that we don't need to do any sort of backfill to local counties, but you do have those 8 that don't bring enough in property tax. So they are going to take a hit, however small. And there are some counties where the reduction in property tax revenue isn't really going to affect them at all. Not at all. In Sheridan County is one of the bigger ones. They're going to take a huge hit. With this property tax bill, yeah, it's going to be like 5%. Probably less than 5%. So anyway, now at the state level, the state spends money, as I told you, from mineral taxes and sales taxes. Well, they have to reduce their spending too. And again, whose money is it? It doesn't belong to the state of Wyoming. It belongs to you and me, Wyoming citizens. So it absolutely makes sense to take mineral royalty money and give it to local communities. Now, you can't, really write a check to individual Wyoming citizens, though we would all like that. So the best way to get that reform back is to give it to local counties. So you had tax reduction on both ends of the spectrum. And so for Bo Beitman to say that that's creating an entitlement is absolutely 100% ridiculous. Let's listen to the next paragraph here. Insiders call this backfill. Senate File 69 was the largest tax cut ever proposed in the state's history. And your Senate did this while protecting the future of Wyoming investment accounts and our children's economic future. Backfill, as they call it, is a socialistic, unsustainable budgetary trick that could only realistically last for a few years before the investment accounts were severely drained and Wyoming could be faced with huge burdens of this new entitlement spending and a depleted savings account. The Wyoming Senate refused to stand with while political posturing threatened our residents by devastating the lucrative returns from years of conservative investing. Okay, so first of all, the plan to not pass a budget wasn't from the very beginning. It's very clear. And I'm telling you that they didn't really cut spending either. I'll get to that in just a second. But there was budget negotiations going on. The House passed a version. The Senate passed a version. Now, the House cut a little over $200 million from the governor's requested supplemental budget. The Senate, on the other hand, in their version of the budget, they gave it all back to the governor, and then some. And so to say that they're cutting spending, not really accurate. Second, this whole scheme to not pass a budget was really at the last minute. And I'll tell you why we know that. Because the Wyoming Senate is trying to cram just about every spending measure they can think of into bills that were not meant for any of that. Now, it's true the House is doing the same thing. And here's the other part of conservatism, my friends. You have to pay for the things, the obligations that you've made. The state of Wyoming has made a lot of obligations to a variety of different areas. So to just say we're not going to spend money on that, not really conservative at all. Now, the supplemental budget, as I told you before on the program, it's to handle things that are unforeseen, that we didn't know about, that we couldn't have thought about, emergency spending. And that's what the House and the Senate should have been focused on. I'll explain where this is going in just a second. But first, let's take an absolutely outrageous profit timeout. More in a minute. You are listening to Cowboy State Politics Live. You can listen to the program on YouTube, on Facebook, on X, on Rumble, pretty much everywhere. It's almost like I'm omnipresent. If you miss an episode of Cowboy State Politics Live, you can always go to the live replay, which is located at the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, under the live replay button. You can listen to the live program every Tuesday through Thursday. Well, that's right now during the legislative session, but coming soon, Tuesday through Friday at 8 a.m. You can listen to the Cowboy State Politics podcast anywhere that you get your podcasts. iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, really any of them will work. But the easiest place is just to go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com. There you can find all of the shows, as well as any of the articles that I might bring up during the course of a program. That way, if your name is Joe Biden and you can't remember if you had your pudding today, well, I probably can't help you with that, but I can definitely tell you why you should have never ran for president. And now, back to our program. Welcome back to the program. David Iverson, Cowboy State Politics Live, the bastion of conservatism in a veritable prairie of liberalism and illogic. Welcome back to the program, my friends. I forgot to tell you in the first segment that I've opened up the phone lines if you want to be part of the program. The phone number here in the Swamp Studio is 307-374-8989. 307-374-8989. If there's something on your mind that you want to talk to me about, go ahead and give me a call. One more time, that phone number is 307-374-8989. Before the break, we were talking about this insane op-ed that's in the Cow Pie. And it is a bait and switch. This is a classic example of you need to watch what the other hand is doing. Let me give you an example. Quote, "We heard from the people loud and clear. If we were going to substantially cut taxes, we had to pull our weight and cut our spending substantially as well. Through a week of hard work, our Senate was able to find alternatives for essential budget actions such as fire mitigation, fully funding education, inflation adjustments, and water infrastructure management, among other things, while not increasing spending by over $1 billion. So what they actually did, I mean, it sounds great when Beitman writes it out, but it's not exactly accurate. And this is why we know that this whole let's not pass a budget thing wasn't their plan from the beginning. It wasn't a conservative agenda. It wasn't anything that Bo Beitman is claiming that it is. So here's what they're doing. They're taking all of these spending measures that he mentions in that paragraph, and they're ramming them in other bills. So, for example, the external cost adjustment, the increase for education spending to account for inflation, it's called an ECA. They put it in the recalibration bill. Every other year, the Wyoming legislature goes through what they call recalibration, and that's when they hire a consultant to look at our education system and find out how they should figure out the funding model. You see, Wyoming funds education in a block grant. So what they do is they say, you need this many teachers, here's the money. You need this money for supplies, here's the money. And it's funded in the form of a block grant. So while the legislature makes suggestions at how education ought to be funded, the school districts really don't have to abide by, well, any of that. So anyway, they rammed that through. And oh, wait a minute, the bill. So they have to pass a bill that sets up this recalibration. So that's the bill that the Wyoming Senate put a raise in. Now, there's no reason to put it in there. It was in the budget. It was fully funded. And, you know, I think the number that teachers and, well, pretty much all staff were going to get was like a 4.8% pay increase. So that was the cost adjustment that came out of the House of Representatives. And guess what? The Wyoming Senate passed that. In fact, there were a number of items, amendments to the budget that the Senate and the House passed that were pretty much mirror amendments. Here's how that usually works. If you have a bill in the House and a bill in the Senate, in the end, they go to conference committee, and conference committee is basically a meeting where they play let's make a deal. They try to come out with one bill. Well, everything that is the same in either house, those aren't up for debate. So if there was something in the House that was passed that was the same as something in the Senate, those things are non-negotiable. Well, there was, I think there's an article, maybe it was in the Cowboy or the Turkey Vulture. Well, anyway, the House went with another proposal to the Senate and said, hey, all these things that we already agreed upon, let's go ahead and pass those because those really aren't up for debate. And Bo Beitman said no. Because he didn't want to pass a supplemental budget because he thinks that it makes him look conservative. And I'm going to tell you about that here in just a second. But anyway, so there was those few things that they had agreed upon that aren't up for debate. Well, the Senate, and specifically Bo Beitman, Terry Nethercott, and Tim Salazar, refused that deal, instead wanting to ram all of their spending through bills that aren't necessarily for that. The fire mitigation bill, they rammed that one through, attached it to a bill that really wasn't for that. So while on the front end, he's claiming that, we're cutting spending. Yeah, we're not spending as much. We're conservative. We didn't pass a budget. A lot of those measures are being rammed through in different bills, and it's creating a disaster in the Legislative Service Office. The guy that is the budget guru in the LSO, his name is Don Richards, he doesn't even know what's happening with all this stuff. So now let's talk about not passing a budget. Now, I realize that this is a supplemental budget, and it's in addition to the biennial budget that Wyoming passes. But again, the Wyoming Constitution clearly says that the second budget can be passed for unforeseen things. So instead of passing a budget, which, by the way, I just have a question. How many times have conservatives railed against the Democrats in Congress for not passing a budget? How many times? I pretty much, like every person who considers themselves a conservative has probably at one time or another said, those Democrats in Congress, they just can't even pass the budget. They just continue to pass continuing resolutions, and we don't have a budget, and we don't have any control over our spending. What did Bo Beitman just do? He canned the budget. Now, regardless of if it was supplemental or not, the spending is still there. He's still ramming it through other bills. And so really any claim he has to being a conservative has gone out the window. Now, let's talk about some other things here. I mentioned the election integrity bills that he killed. There were 11 of them. Just about every conservative that I know thinks that having a secure election is probably a good thing. Pretty much all of them. Instead, and let me just give you one example. There was a ban on ballot drop boxes. Yeah, the Senate killed it. Yeah. I've got an article down here in the stack of stuff about all of the election integrity measures that the Senate killed. Let me see if I can find it here. Let's just look through here. But like I say, most of the and the governor vetoed the ultrasound bill. That's incredible. All right, here we go. From the Turkey Vulture, an article entitled "Bills Banning Ballot Drop Boxes, Touchscreen Voting Machines Fail in the Senate." Quote, a majority of the Secretary of State Chuck Gray's election integrity bills died Friday night after failing to pass first reading in the Wyoming Senate. Remember, Bo Beitman says that the Wyoming Senate is super ultra conservative, and here they are killing election integrity bills. But anyway, let's see here. A large number of election-related bills were filed this session, making up 8% of the total proposed legislation, according to WyoPile. And by the way, just to give you a little heads up, I've got a big story coming in this area. I don't want to really give you too many details, but I've got FOIA requests in, and I know exactly what's in them. I'm just waiting for the official documents. It's going to blow your mind, my friends. But anyway, continuing with the bill. House Bill 245, pen and paper ballots would have removed touchscreen voting machines that have been used by Laramie County voters for decades. Lee previously told lawmakers this bill would upend elections in your county. That's Deborah Lee. By the way, Deborah Lee is the only county clerk that is actually under investigation for election-related malfeasance. Malfeasance is probably the wrong word, but we could substitute it by saying screwing up elections. Quote, after failed bill, House Bill 131, ballot drop box prohibition, would have created a statewide ban on ballot drop boxes. Lee and several other county clerks argued that the removal of the ballot drop boxes could disenfranchise qualified electors from participating in Wyoming elections. Here's the problem with that. Before COVID, we didn't have ballot drop boxes. If you wanted to deliver your ballot by hand, you just had to walk it into the clerk's office. That's the only thing you had to do. The problem with ballot drop boxes is not only that they are susceptible to ballot stuffing, they're also susceptible to spoiled ballots. Maybe not in Wyoming, but there have been several cases across the United States where ballot drop boxes have been set on fire or things have been dumped in them. Well, the problem with that, you got to do is drop a bottle of water in one of these things and it spoils all the ballots. And then it's just because the ballot is spoiled and you have a ballot drop box. So, there's no way to fix that. And there's no reason for it anyway. There's no reason why people can't walk their ballot into the clerk's office. And secondly, we shouldn't be dropping ballots off anyway. If you need an absentee ballot, we have a process to do that. You go request an absentee ballot, they mail it to you, you fill it out, you mail it back, or you drop it off in person. You see, the problem is you have clerks that aren't necessarily too conservative. So like Julie Freeze over in Fremont County. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous that we have one. Let's see here. Quote, they could deliver their ballot securely. They could have delivered it independently, Lee said. Some of them had health concerns, and they were really glad they were able to get that ballot to us without having to come into the office. Voting, my friends, is a duty. That's one of the few things that you have to do, and I mean you don't really have to do it, but that you should do as a United States citizen. You should take care with it. Your vote matters, and if you want any evidence that your vote absolutely does matter, look at what happened in Weston County this year. The clerk absolutely screwed up the election, and I mean it's just perfect evidence where we don't have a solid election system, no matter what Gail Simmons has to say. Let's see here. What else? House Bill 156, proof of voter residency and registration qualifications. Now, this one successfully passed the legislature, and it's been signed by the governor. So there was one election integrity bill that made it through and wasn't killed in Bo Beitman's Senate. But there were a ton of them. Let's see here, and I quote from Secretary Gray, despite a lot of the good work we've been able to achieve and continue to achieve, I'm disappointed that 7 key election integrity bills were not heard on Friday, Gray said in an email to the Turkey Vulture. Quote, all of these passed overwhelmingly in the House of Representatives, were heard and passed in the Senate Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions Committee, and died before they could be heard in the Senate. So please tell me again, how conservative is Bo Beitman and how conservative is his Senate? And you know what? Looking at the clock, we're pretty close to the bottom of the hour break. So let's go ahead and take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Governor Gordon vetoing the ultrasound bill. Yeah, he claims he's pro-life. Yeah, I don't know anybody that's pro-life that insists that we should be able to kill babies. But we'll do that in just a second. You can listen to Cowboy State Politics live every Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. on the Independence Network. Make sure that you subscribe and follow the Cowboy State Politics podcast. You can do that from the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, or anywhere that you get your podcasts. That way, you'll make sure that you won't miss a single episode of Cowboy State Politics.
Concerned about the future of Wyoming, but unsure how to help? Honor Wyoming is giving you the chance to create real, lasting influence. And it's as easy as 1, 2, 3. The Honor Wyoming Bill Tracker is designed to empower Wyoming voters. We're cutting through the noise and equipping you with all the info you need to keep tabs on Wyoming lawmakers, as well as the tools to take action on the issues that matter to you most. Keeping a close eye on key legislation in Cheyenne, we've made it easy to stay informed by providing real-time bill updates and timely take action alerts. Our one-click links make it easy to email key lawmakers at the right time. All you have to do is click and your voice will be heard. Ensuring lawmakers are listening to the people they serve year-round. Protecting the Wyoming way isn't a spectator sport, and voting is only half the story. Get involved today and do your part. With the Honor Wyoming Bill Tracker, it's as easy as 1, 2, 3.
Welcome back to the program. David Iverson, Cowboy State Politics Live. Wyoming's conservative voice, documented to be almost always right 99% of the time, a record that nobody else in the Wyoming media has, because most of the time they just lie to you. Or they distort the truth, or they say that rhinos are actually conservative. I mean, the list is long and distinguished of the crimes of the Wyoming media. But that's why you should just pay attention to Cowboy State Politics. I'll shoot you straight. I'll tell you exactly who's doing what and what's going on. And most of the time, I've got them in their own words. So before the break, I was telling you that Governor Gordon vetoed the ultrasound bill. Governor Gordon, he claims to be pro-life, but really he isn't. One of the first actions he did is he vetoed the infant born alive bill. Yeah, not super conservative. But there's been a lot of things. Now, and I'll admit, he has signed some pro-life legislation that's actually good, but, he's a lame duck now, and he doesn't have to really worry about it. So from the Cow Pie, in an article entitled, Gordon Vetoes Bill Requiring Women to Get Ultrasounds Before Abortions. And I quote, Governor Gordon vetoed a bill Monday, March 3rd, that would require women in Wyoming to get ultrasounds before getting in the abortion pill. He called the proposal personally invasive and an often medically unnecessary procedure. Governor Gordon made his first votes of the 2025 legislative session Monday night, including a bill requiring women to get ultrasounds before prescription-induced abortion. So first of all, most abortions in the entire country happen with the use of the abortion pill. And by the way, the abortifacients bill is still tied up in court. The Wyoming Supreme Court is mulling that one over. But if you're going to allow abortions to continue without any regulation whatsoever, and the number one killer of babies, and let's just be honest, we use the term abortion because it's clinical. It allows us to talk about something that's absolutely horrible without throwing up in our mouths. But if we were honest, we would just call it what it is. It is killing babies. That's what abortion is. So Gordon says that this is a medically unnecessary procedure. Well, he might be right about that, but that's not the reason why you would have an ultrasound before an abortion. Studies have shown that the vast majority of people who have an ultrasound before an abortion don't go through with it. That's the point of the bill. And secondly, there's this narrative that was started in the House of Representatives, at least I think it was started there, that this ultrasound is just medically invasive. And there was a lot of hyperbolic rhetoric that happened on the floor of the House, that women are just going to have to be abused by doctors. And I'm not an obstetrician, so I can't tell you exactly how these things work. But what I've been told is most of the time it's not what they call a transvaginal ultrasound. But the point being, my friends, is that statistically, if you have an ultrasound before you have an abortion, you don't go through with it. That was the one thing, the first thing. And secondly, and I don't know, let's see if this article covers it. House Enrolled Act 35 passed the Senate on third reading. Oh, yeah, so this is talking about the vote. So this bill passed both houses overwhelmingly, way above the 2/3 threshold to override the governor's veto, which I would expect that's probably going to the House definitely will try to pass that today. The question is whether or not the Senate will agree. They're so super conservative, you never know what they're going to do. From the Cowboy, and I quote, House Enrolled Act 35 passed the Senate on third reading on a vote of 24-7. And the House concurrence with a 47-12 vote. If those margins stay consistent, the legislature would have more than 2/3 necessary to override the governor's veto. Representative Rachel Rodriguez Williams, one of my favorites, she said, and I quote, I'm very disappointed that Governor Gordon would veto this common sense bill, Rodriguez Williams said. The governor claims to be pro-life, but he's not. And I've got a little excerpt from his veto letter. Listen to this one. To be clear, I'm pro-life. Life is precious, and that applies to both mother and child. Every year, we continue to lose unborn babies in Wyoming. Making it easier for mothers to have babies in Wyoming and supporting them afterwards is a far better course. Mandating this intimate, personally invasive, and often medically unnecessary procedure goes too far. Accordingly, I'm vetoing this act. If further laws are needed after the Wyoming Supreme Court rules, the legislature can thoughtfully consider them at that time. To be clear, I'm pro-life, but I'm going to absolutely make sure that more babies get killed with abortion pills. I mean, that's essentially what he's saying. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. And it is really an attempt to hoodwink Wyoming citizens. And the person that is telling you that that continues to tell you that I'm conservative, I'm pro-life over and over and over and over again is an attempt to convince you probably of something that's not true. If all of these individuals were conservative, including Governor Gordon, he would have passed that thing. It's a bill that several other states have passed, and it's just amazing that the folks that say that they're conservative, really, when it comes down to it, they prove that they're not. And just absolutely blows my mind, my friends. Another bill that bit the dust, and this is actually a good thing, is the Generational Investment Bill. This was an attempt to create yet another coffee can. Now, I started the program telling you how Wyoming has one of the largest sovereign wealth funds in the entire country, to the tune of around $30 billion. So why do we need another trust fund? You see, there are over 600 different what we call coffee cans in Wyoming, and they're all sorts of different trust funds, and they run the gamut of just about everything you can think of. And this is an attempt to create yet another one. Now, remember, the government doesn't have any money of its own. It's all your money. All of it is. And so the only way that government can get money is if they steal it from you. And that's really what taxation is. It's legalized theft. And in this case, it has been an Ocean's 11 version of theft from Wyoming citizens for a very long time. instead of creating, tax cuts and, maybe giving some of that money back to Wyoming citizens, the Wyoming legislature either shoves it in another trust fund that they can use later, or they just spend it. And the reality is, my friends, that Wyoming doesn't need another trust fund. What it does need is some tax reform to Wyoming citizens. And that's another issue that is really stuck in my craw. The Wyoming Senate killed House Bill 282, and that was the acquisition value study. Now, Beitman mentions that in his op-ed. It's California style. We don't need that California stuff in Wyoming. Well, let me put it to you simply. Right now, your property taxes are determined by what your neighbor does. Yep, you could not do a darn thing to your house, not do anything with it, and yet over years, it will increase in value. It's the only thing in our system that actually appreciates in value. Every other thing we buy actually depreciates in value. The longer your car, for example, the longer you own it, the less it's worth. I mean, you drive it off the lot and it drops in value. Your guns are probably one exception that if you keep them up, they tend to appreciate in value. But your house, it tends to appreciate to a great degree. So a lot of Wyoming citizens, for example, my parents paid $56,000 for their house. It now appraises at close to $300,000. But they're never going to realize that amount. They're never going to sell it. They're going to keep that house until the day they die. And so really they're paying taxes on an unrealized capital gain. You hear the argument from the liberals saying that, oh, no, it's good for you that your property is worth more. Well, not if you're not going to sell it. It doesn't mean anything to you. It just means that you're going to be taxed at a higher rate. And here's the major problem with it. If somebody comes into your neighborhood and pays $500,000 more for a house than what it's actually worth, your taxes go up. Acquisition value, on the other hand, would tax you depending upon what you paid for the house. And it's really simple. Clearly, your property is worth what you paid for it, because if it wasn't, you wouldn't have paid that amount. And clearly, you're okay with that amount because you paid it. And so why shouldn't you pay taxes on the amount that you paid? Now, the Clerks Association, the Assessors Association, they continued to claim, oh, we can't do this. This is not possible. This will completely upend our system. Well, they already have your property value. They already have what you paid for it. So why isn't it possible? It's a common sense solution that really would be property tax reform. And yet the Senate killed it, and Bo Beitman calls it a California solution for a Wyoming problem. And by the way, where have we heard that phrase? We need Wyoming solutions for Wyoming problems. That was the mantra of the Wyoming caucus, all the liberals in the Wyoming legislature. This isn't a Wyoming solution for a Wyoming problem. And here's how dumb that is. If somebody comes up with the cure for cancer in Missouri, Wyoming's not going to look at that and say, you know what, we need a Wyoming cure for cancer. We don't need that silly Missouri stuff. Don't Missouri my Wyoming. It's absolutely stupid. In fact, the Wyoming Constitution is an amalgamation of different passages from different constitutions. My favorite one, Article 1, Section 7, absolute arbitrary power has no, I can't quote it to you right now, but it's absolute arbitrary power. That was taken from the Virginia Constitution. So don't give me this crap that we don't need anything from any of these other states. The truth is that acquisition value was the only property tax reform in the Wyoming legislature. Now, what we have right now is a whole bunch of different exemptions, including Senate File 69, that instead of fixing the problem, we're just going to put a Band-Aid over it. That it's a 25% reduction. We can't fix the actual problem, and that is escalating home prices based upon what somebody else paid for their property, which in turn jacks up your property tax. We can't fix that problem. No, we just have to put a 25% reduction on it. And, by the way, let's talk about that for a minute. The House of Representatives passed a 50% tax reduction because there's that little people's initiative that's coming next year on the ballot, and that is probably going to pass. So what are you going to do with your exemption then, Bo? The point was with the House version of the bill that if that ballot initiative is approved, then this little exemption goes away. Not the way the Senate has approved it. Now it's a 25% reduction. And by the way, It was the Senate that demanded a 25% reduction. When they went into the first conference committee, the House guys were blindsided by that. They had no idea. That had never been discussed in the Senate or in the House, and it was Tim Salazar and Kangaroo Mike Giroux that brought that, and Troy McEwen. That was their made up, and again, not voted on in the Senate. And that's another thing that I forgot to mention. Holy crap, my friends, I can't believe this one. So the supplemental budget. No vote took place in the Senate to do away with the supplemental budget. They didn't pass a vote. They didn't go to caucus. It was Bo Beitman, Tim Salazar, and Slithers Nethercott that decided that. Oh, and probably Mark Gordon was in there too. They decided that all on their own. And here's the problem, my friends. The rest of the Senate voted on all of those amendments. They crafted a Senate version of the bill. They absolutely did. All of those things were voted on. But then, all of a sudden, Bo Beitman decides on his own, without a vote of his chamber, that he's just not going to pass the supplemental budget. There were many senators that didn't even know this was happening, that they found about it in the cow pie. I mean, absolutely incredible, my friends. This is not how our system works. Whether you agree with it or not, we have a bicameral legislature, and we have a process by which this goes through. You may not have agreed with all of the amendments that were added to the supplemental budget, but they were voted on. That your elected representatives voted on those things. And for Bo Beitman to just unilaterally, all on his own, say we're not going to pass a supplemental budget, that's not how our system is set up. That's what Article 1, Section 7 is talking about in the Wyoming Constitution. Absolute arbitrary power. Once a measure is voted on, and in the Senate, they voted on it. I see no reason why they didn't hold a vote to see if they were going to can it or not. It's absolutely incredible, my friends, and it's certainly not conservative. I mean, there are so many things that are going on in the Wyoming legislature this year that it's just created a circus, is what it has. I find it highly offensive. It's not conservative, and you should hold your elected officials accountable, specifically Bo Beitman, Slithers Nethercott, and Tim, I carry a man per Salazar. Be back in a minute. He actually does, by the way. Christmas is over, and all of the fun holiday cheer has been had. And what are we all left with? Frigid Wyoming weather. Below freezing temperatures that you still have to go out in. That's right, you do have to go back to work at one point or another. And not to scare you, but think about this. Every single morning, you get to scrape the ice off of your windshield. Now, while I can't do anything with that, I can make sure that your feet stay nice and toasty warm while you're doing it. All you have to do is order a pair of socks from the Buffalo Wool Company. They are the finest socks that I've ever put on my feet. And to get you a pair of them, go to the website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Trust me, you're not going to be disappointed. Wyoming is one of the most sought-after places to live. There's a lot of people that want to move to our great state. And if you're thinking about selling your house to one of them, you need a real estate agent that you can trust. That agent is Rebecca Bextel at Compass Real Estate. She's lived in Jackson for almost 20 years and has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market. Last year, she sold almost $25 million worth of property. So if you're thinking of buying or selling, give a call. Her phone number is 307-699-3519.
I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day, don't you? Well, I can show you how. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel
Welcome back to the program, Cowboy State Politics Live on YouTube, Facebook, X, Rumble, pretty much everywhere. It's almost like I'm omnipresent, my friends. You can listen to the Cowboy State Politics Live program starting next week, every Tuesday through Friday at 8 a.m. Also, make sure that you don't miss an episode of the Cowboy State Politics podcast. That one's published every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Every Monday, Wednesday, Saturday. How could I forget that? I've been doing that for 5 years. Anyway, there was a great program that I published yesterday on the podcast. It was a talk given by my friend Maylene Salabarria. She escaped communist Cuba. Since I've been doing the program, I have brought you stories from people who have escaped communist countries. And the reason why I do it is I want you to see exactly what life is like under communism and socialism. And so that there's no argument about it. So that when you're listening to people and they say, we should be a little bit more social, we should have socialism here. It's great. That way that you have facts, that you've heard the stories, you know what life is like, and there's another great example of that on the podcast. So don't miss that. It's called Escape from Communism, Volume 4, Maylene in Cuba. So go check that out on the podcast. It's actually, I think it's great to hear her story. I'm really blessed to have her as a friend. So anyway, now before the break and through this whole program, I've been mentioning to you Article 1, Section 7 of the Wyoming Constitution. Here's what it actually says. No absolute arbitrary power. Absolute arbitrary power over the lives, liberty, and property of free men exists nowhere in a republic, not even in the largest majority. Now think about what Bo Beitman did in the Senate, where he canned the supplemental budget without even a vote. The members of the Senate, whether you agree with the amendments or not, whether you agree with the supplemental budget or not, you have to set that aside. The budget was voted on. And Bo Beitman, all on his own, said, we're not going to do that. Yeah, we're just not going to pass a supplemental budget. We've got to cut spending. It's not conservative. Absolutely stupid. You can tell that he didn't plan it because his senators are now trying to cram through every amendment they can think of to fund all of these things that they know they're going to be held accountable for. It's not conservative to not handle your responsibilities, my friends. It's not conservative to do that in any way, shape, or form. Now, one good thing, and actually, in all fairness, there have been a couple of good things that have come out of this legislative session. One, we don't have to worry about gun-free zones anymore. That one was taken care of, though I personally disagree that you have to get a concealed weapons permit. I don't think that you need to ask permission from anybody to carry your firearm to protect you and your family. The Constitution doesn't say unless you don't have a concealed weapons permit. It doesn't say that. You have an absolute right to carry a firearm. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, my friends, and it's pretty clear what that means. But nonetheless, we have done away with gun-free zones in the state of Wyoming. That's absolutely a good thing. I don't know of a school shooting that's happened when there's been guns on campus. If I'm a criminal and I walk up to a school and I want to kill some people, if there's a sign that says, "Hey, our people are armed and we're probably going to shoot you," my guess is you're probably not going to go in there. Many state legislatures. Absolutely, it is legal to carry a open carry or concealed carry a firearm in the legislature. Now, this bill says that you have to carry it concealed, but we'll take it. Another good gun bill that came out of this is the Second Amendment Protection Act amendments. Now, the original plan all along was to include a civil penalty in our SAPE bill. Now, if you remember a couple of years ago, we passed what is considered to be the strongest SAFE bill in the country, and that is it has a criminal penalty on it, that if your guns are unconstitutionally taken away from you, well, then you're guilty of, you're guilty of a misdemeanor, and it's $1,000 fine or a year in jail. And now we've added a civil penalty along with it, so now you can sue. But that was always the original plan. It just so happened with the original SAPE bill, we were not going to get that through in that legislative session. So it was always the plan to come back and add a civil penalty, and now we have. So not only did we have the strongest SAPE bill in the country, now we have a SAPE bill that I'm pretty sure, in fact, I know it's a fact. No other state has this. So that is absolutely a good thing. From the Turkey Vulture, Republicans ready to aim at gun regulations. And this is on the national level here. So we've had some good success this legislative session. Some of the good things that have come out of it. And to be fair, those two measures passed the Senate pretty overwhelmingly. I mean, there was no question about them because rhinos have to run on gun bills. That's in Wyoming. If you're not pro Second Amendment, you're not going to get elected. So that's why they put those two gun bills through there. And as much. Even with all my complaining about Bo Beitman and the Senate and Slithers Nethercott and how they've really done a poor job this legislative session, they did get a couple of good bills through. So we got to be fair about that. Let's hear here from the Turkey Vulture, and I quote, House Republicans voted to overturn a rule that cracked down on firearms with stabilizing braces, only to have the Senate Democrats reject the effort. One long-shot bill to abolish the ATF never made it out of committee. And although the House proposed policy riders in funding legislation attacking firearm regulations, those provisions were not included in a package negotiated with Democrats. Now, with control over Congress and the White House, Republicans are well positioned to spike Biden gun regulations and exert their will over the agency tasked with regulating firearms dealers that has long been a target of conservative ire. Absolutely, it has. There is no more corrupt organization than alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. They've been responsible for killing law-abiding citizens since their entire existence. Representative Bob Aderholt of Alabama, a member of the House Appropriations Committee, said former President Joe Biden was not going to sign an appropriations bill with certain language that went after his own administration's gun rules. Quote, we don't have that issue this time, Aderholt said. I think it's very ripe that we can get some of that language this time. The Trump administration is angling for change on its own. An executive order from Donald Trump this month stated that the Second Amendment is an indispensable safeguard of security and liberty, and ordered the Attorney General to examine all orders and regulations of executive departments to assess any ongoing infringements of our Second Amendment rights of our citizens. The order also instructed the Attorney General to present a proposed plan of action. Representative Tom Tiffany, a Wisconsin Republican on the House Judiciary Committee, said he sees the role of Congress as going after Biden regulations. Quote, I don't think we should make the administration do all the heavy lifting here, he said, mentioning the Congressional Review Act, a tool that allows Congress to overturn federal agency rules. Joint resolutions of disapproval under the Congressional Review Act can pass both chambers with a simple majority and can avoid a filibuster in the Senate, leaving Democrats without a procedural tool to stop them. No doubt, with the Trump administration in power, we're going to see a lot of Biden's gun control measures meet their demise, and they absolutely should. The Constitution is very clear. It means what it says, and it says what it means, and it doesn't say what it doesn't say. And one thing it doesn't say is that you can pass regulations on guns. And, as a firm Second Amendment guy, in fact, I don't think there's too many people to the right of me. There's no reason why we should have regulations on firearms. The truth is that the lowest crime rate of any constituency in America, even lower than police, are people who carry a concealed weapon. In Wyoming, we should be number one on, for gun rights there. And actually, after this session, we will be, but there's no reason why we should have insane restrictions. Just our Colorado, the communist state to the south of us, they just passed a ban on pretty much all semi-automatic firearms. Think about that. When I went to college at Regis University back in the 2000s, Colorado was pretty darn conservative. It resembled Wyoming in a lot of ways. But now that's all over with. The Democrats are firmly in charge, and they've pretty much banned, all semi-automatic firearms, which, if you think about it, a majority of firearms that are made now are semi-automatic and are subject to that ban. So we got communists to the south of us. We've got Republican conservatives in control of Congress, and we're trying to get conservatives in control in the Wyoming legislature. Well, we've burned through another busy broadcast hour on the program. Make sure that you don't miss a single episode of Cowboy State Politics, the podcast, Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. Make sure you subscribe and follow the show. You can do that from the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, or anywhere that you get your podcasts. But for now, my friends, from the depths of the Middle Swamp, I'm David Iverson, and this is Cowboy State Politics. I'll see you tomorrow.